I had just wrapped my cardigan tighter around me when the phone rang. It was the kind of overcast Monday that made everything feel quieter. My coffee had gone cold in my hands, but I hadn't noticed. I was too focused on the yard, where the wind kept chasing leaves across the lawn that Owen used to mow on Sundays. We'd lived in this house for 37 years, raised our children here, fought and made up in the kitchen, and laughed ourselves breathless on the back porch. Now it was just me in a space that had grown too large for one heart to carry. Alone, I didn't get many calls these days, but when Lionel's name lit up the screen, I already knew this wasn't just a check-in. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to remind someone that you're still in charge of your own life. My name is Rose Holloway. I'm 67, retired, and a widow for 5 years now. I used to teach 3rd grade before Owen and I bought this house in a quiet neighborhood outside Williamsburg. Back then, life felt full. We had a little garden out front, Sunday pot roasts, and 2 kids who filled the rooms with noise and questions. We didn't have much growing up. Owen and I both came from working families, but we believed in being decent and fair. I raised my son and daughter to think for themselves, to be kind and strong. Somewhere along the way, Lionel took that strength and twisted it into something harder, like success was the only measure of worth. He climbed fast in the corporate world and started treating anything outside of his blueprint as inefficient, including me. After Owen passed, things shifted quickly. At first, Lionel helped with the paperwork and checking on the furnace. Then it was bank accounts. Then my spending. At first, I was grateful, honestly. But he began speaking to me like I was a client he didn't fully trust, slowing down his words, pointing out where the trash bins should go, reminding me to check expiration dates. Last month, I bought my granddaughter Faye a bike for her birthday. He said, 6-year-olds don't need expensive gifts. He'd said it half joking, but the way Veronica nodded along made my skin itch. They'd started stopping by more often too, always with a folder, always with a reason. That Monday, Lionel called to say he'd be over around 2. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He never really asked anymore. He said it was nothing urgent, which was exactly how I knew it would be. I'd already started tidying the living room before he arrived, not because I cared what he thought, but because I knew any dust on a table would become a conversation about my capability. When the doorbell rang, he was standing there in his usual pressed slacks, and Veronica was beside him, holding a pie like it was an award she'd won. "No sugar," she said. "We're watching your health." I thanked her anyway. They didn't sit long before Lionel started inspecting the house, pointing out a shadow on the ceiling and calling it water damage. I told him it was the same tree shadow that had been there for years, but he was already talking about calling someone. We sat down with tea, and before I could even sip mine, he opened a folder and began reviewing my bank statements. That's when I learned he'd somehow gotten access to my accounts. "You're spending too much," he said, like I'd charged a yacht. I told him the $500 was a gift for Faye, not for nothing. "She already has a bike," he insisted. "A tricycle," I corrected him. "She's 6 now." It didn't stop there. He brought up the cruise I'd taken with Iris last year, called it reckless. Told me I had to think about the future, as if I hadn't already lived through more futures than he could imagine. Then came the suggestion about selling the house, and the beach cabin Owen and I had saved up for back when we still talked about retirement plans over pancakes. "It's sitting idle," he said. Veronica chimed in, mentioning taxes and upkeep. I told them I'd think about it, which was the only way to end the conversation. But the final blow came when Lionel unfolded a document and said he'd spoken to our family lawyer. "It's just precaution," he said. "Power of attorney in case I became unable to make decisions." That's when I realized this wasn't concern. This was a takeover. He wasn't asking to help. He was preparing to own. And when I mentioned that I'd call Iris if I needed support, his face changed. Cold. Almost offended. My daughter, who grows gardens and laughter, has never tried to take 1 inch of my life. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood up and told them the conversation was over. Lionel left red-faced. Veronica left the pie behind untouched. That night, I pulled out an old photo of Owen and me from the day we bought this house. We were younger then, but even back in that photo, his arm around me said, "You don't have to ask permission to be yourself." I looked around the quiet walls and realized something I hadn't said aloud in years. I'm not ready to be managed. I'm ready to live. The next morning, I poured my coffee, opened my day planner, and saw a note about visiting Iris next week. Instead, I packed a bag and got in the car. The idea of seeing her, not just hearing her voice on the phone, felt like a kind of medicine. I drove the familiar 20 minutes to the botanical garden, past the old mill, through the parkway where the speed bumps had been recently repainted. The parking lot was half full, and the scent of fresh soil and spring blossoms drifted toward me before I even reached the gate. I found her in the rose garden, as I knew I would, kneeling by a bush with pruning shears in hand. Her straw hat shaded her face, and her hands moved gently, but with precision, clearing away wilted petals. She didn't see me at first, and for a moment I just stood there, taking in how at ease she looked. When she finally spotted me, her face lit up. "Mom," she said, brushing her gloves together and rising to her feet. "You're early." She smelled faintly of roses and grass when she hugged me. We sat on a wooden bench nearby while she finished her section, the breeze stirring her linen dress and lifting strands of blonde hair from her ponytail. I watched her work with such care and thoughtfulness, the same way she had always approached life, and I remembered when Lionel had mocked her for choosing this path. I'd stayed silent back then, unsure of how to defend her choices. Now watching her so assured in her own world, I wished I'd said more. When she finished, she led me toward the cafe near the front gate. The staff greeted her by name as we passed. We carried our blueberry muffins and herbal tea to a quiet table in the corner. "Something's happened," she said softly after we sat. "You have that look." I smiled faintly and told her about the visit, about the leak that wasn't a leak, about the folder of financial printouts, about the power of attorney Lionel tried to slide across the table. As I talked, her face grew still. "He read your bank statements," she asked. I nodded. "Without your permission," another nod, "and tried to get you to sign over your decisions." She sat back, lips pressed into a line. "Mom, this is beyond overstepping. He has no right." I told her I'd stood up to him, told him I didn't need help, that I hadn't authorized any of it. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I know that wasn't easy." We finished our tea, then walked to the greenhouse. On the way, we talked about little things, her garden projects, my old book club, the school play that Faye had starred in last month as a baby squirrel. Iris had a way of easing a heavy heart without trying too hard. Inside the greenhouse, surrounded by the damp air and bright orchids, she paused near a display case of deep purple blooms. "We've been meaning to invite you for dinner," she said. "Brad has something he wants to share. We both do." I smiled. "Lasagna." She nodded. His signature. That evening, I parked outside their new building in Brooklyn Heights. The towers were sleek and modern, framed by carefully designed landscaping and curved walkways. I still had trouble reconciling the image of my daughter, a gardener who once bartered for compost with someone living in a place like this. But she and Brad had made it work, and they had built a home filled with life. Faye ran out the moment she saw me. "Grandma," she shouted, her arms around my waist. "Daddy's cooking, and I made the salad." "Come on." I let her pull me inside, her excitement spilling over like a fountain. The elevator climbed to the 10th floor, and their apartment opened into a bright living space with wide windows and the scent of oregano and tomatoes hanging in the air. Brad stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands. "Rose," he said, hugging me, "we're so glad you're here. Hope you're hungry." Faye took my hand and showed me her new drawings on the coffee table. I looked around the room. Simple furniture, scattered books, family photos, and potted plants in every corner. Nothing felt showy or staged. It felt real. It felt like them. Over dinner, we talked about school and work, and Brad's new project with the city's industrial park. Iris asked about my classes. Faye showed me how she could spell chrysanthemum without looking at her notebook. Then Iris and I began clearing the table while Brad and Faye set up a board game in the corner. "That apartment I told you about," Iris said, drawing a plate. "The one below ours, it's still available." She glanced at me. "We thought maybe you'd want to move in. Be closer. Have a new place smaller, easier. And near us." I hesitated. "That's a big step." She nodded. "It is. But you'd be near Faye. We'd see each other every day. No more worrying about pipes or shingles or garden hoses that don't work." Brad joined us. "It's a good apartment," he said. "Terrace, new appliances, full security. And the neighborhood is quiet, clean, close to everything." I asked how I could afford something like that. He explained that if I sold the house and the beach cabin, I could buy the apartment outright. No mortgage, maybe even with money left over. Iris opened a folder from the drawer and handed me a glossy booklet. Inside were images of light-filled rooms, floor plans, landscaped paths. She pointed to the 9th floor. "Ours is here. Yours would be right below." I flipped through the pages slowly. The terrace, the view, the built-in closets. Everything clean, efficient, calm. "It's a lot to think about," I said, though. My hands lingered on the page with the park view. Iris smiled gently. "We just wanted to offer it. No pressure, just consider it." Brad poured us each a small glass of wine. Faye clambered onto the couch next to me with her game board. "Grandma, if you live here, I could visit every day." I looked at her hopeful eyes, then around the room. It didn't feel like giving up something. It felt like moving towards something. "I'll call a realtor tomorrow," I said, "and we'll see what happens." Iris beamed. Brad gave a quiet nod. The rest of the night passed in quiet games, shared stories, and the clink of glasses. Later on the drive home, I kept seeing that page in the booklet. 9th floor. Park view. Morning light on the terrace. That night, after dinner with Iris and Brad, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the drawer where I kept the folder from when Owen and I bought the beach house. Inside were the original blueprints, a few faded photographs, and Hugo Prescott's business card still crisp after all these years. I set it aside on the nightstand. The next morning, I called him. His voice was just as I remembered, steady, polite, with a hint of southern ease that always made him sound patient. "Rose Holloway," he said. "Now that's a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you?" I told him I was thinking of selling both properties, the beach house and the main house. He didn't sound shocked, only thoughtful. We arranged to meet that afternoon at 2. By lunchtime, I had gathered the deed paperwork and made a checklist of what I'd need if I moved. I stood in the living room, the sun pooling across the carpet where Owen's recliner used to sit, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then I remembered Faye's voice, her excitement when she talked about visiting me after school, and the doubt passed. Hugo arrived exactly on time, wearing a neat blazer and carrying a yellow notepad. We sat in the kitchen with a pot of tea and some leftover muffins from Iris's garden cafe. "Brooklyn Heights?" he asked after I told him about the apartment. "Fine choice. I've heard good things." "That's a well-built place, strong market." I asked him if selling both homes and the car would be enough to buy the new place outright. He jotted down a few notes, asked about the car's age and mileage, and nodded slowly. "With today's market, I'd say yes. And then some. He suggested we begin with the beach house. It would be easier to list first, smaller, easier to prep, and in a location that practically sold itself. We agreed to drive out the next day. After he left, I started pulling boxes from the attic. Not the heavy kind, just the ones with things Owen and I had meant to sort through, but never had. The next morning was clear and cool. Hugo met me at the beach house, and to my relief, it had held up better than I expected. The landscaping was a little overgrown, but the local maintenance team we'd hired years ago had done their job. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar and salt. The floors were clean, the kitchen spotless, and there were only a few things that needed touch-ups. Hugo took photos, measured the rooms, and by the end of the visit, he already had a draft listing ready in his notebook. Within 10 days of the listing going live, we had 3 serious buyers. The couple who made the final offer, Nathan and Elizabeth, were young, polite, and completely in love with the place. Elizabeth stood on the back deck during the showing and said, "This is where I want to drink my coffee every morning." I watched them point out where they'd put the hammock, which room might be for a future nursery. I nodded along, imagining the place filled with life again. Hugo handled the paperwork with his usual precision. The sale closed quickly, and they paid over asking. Not long after the car sold, too. A man from Richmond came to test drive it, and once he saw the mileage and condition, he made an offer on the spot. Hugo was right, having kept it mostly parked had turned out to be a good thing. Then we turned to the main house. That one I knew would be harder. The neighborhood was still desirable, but the house showed its years. Hugo suggested some light renovations. Nothing big, he assured me. Fresh paint, maybe a few light fixtures. Just enough to help buyers see the potential. I agreed, even though the idea of strangers painting over our walls made my chest tighten. But I kept reminding myself this wasn't erasing memories. It was opening space for someone else to begin. The crew Hugo recommended was quick and respectful. They used soft, neutral tones and added small touches that didn't feel intrusive. The house looked brighter, warmer. Still mine, but not only mine anymore. During those weeks, Iris came over regularly to help me sort through what to keep and what to let go. We worked room by room, filling boxes for donation, for storage, and for the new apartment. "You sure about this one?" she'd ask, holding up something from a shelf. "I take the memories," I'd say. "The rest is just things." I kept Owen's old letters, our anniversary photo, a few pieces of furniture that would fit in the smaller space, but most of it I was ready to leave behind. By the time we received a solid offer on the house, a family of 4 looking for space to grow, I felt ready. The price came in just under our asking, but Hugo negotiated a fair adjustment, and we accepted. "Congratulations, Rose," he said, as we signed the final set of papers. "You've done well." I thanked him and meant it. There was relief in knowing the decisions were behind me now, the big ones at least. No more repair lists. No more empty rooms. The following morning, Hugo and I visited the Brooklyn Heights sales office. Iris took the day off and met us there. The office was modern, all clean lines and big windows. Vivian, the sales manager, greeted us with a firm handshake. "So, you're interested in 902, she said. "Great choice. Compact, functional, and a lovely view." She led us across the landscape courtyard past a small cafe and into the building. The elevator took us to the 9th floor. When she opened the door, I stepped inside and stood still. The first thing I noticed was the light, soft and golden, filling the room from wall to wall. The open-plan kitchen flowed into the living space, and the windows overlooked a green park dotted with trees and walking paths. The bedroom was smaller than I was used to, but cozy, with a built-in closet and a bench under the window. The bathroom had everything I needed: modern fixtures, thoughtful storage. Then Vivian showed us the terrace. It was just big enough for a small table and 2 chairs. I stepped outside and looked at the view. The city felt distant here. The trees rustled gently below. So Iris asked from behind me, "Do you like it?" I nodded slowly. It's perfect. Back in the office, we reviewed the paperwork. Hugo looked over every line, made sure the terms were in my favor. Because I was paying in full. Vivian offered a small discount and reduced cost for the furniture package. I agreed to both. When can I move in? I asked. A week, Vivian said. Everything's ready. We walked out into the sunshine, and Iris took my hand. No more roof leaks, she said. No more folders on the kitchen table. I looked back at the building behind us, then forward to the walk ahead. It was happening. The morning after we signed the papers, I stood in the living room of the house that had once held so much life and began folding the last of the photo albums into a box marked Iris. Hold for now. The furniture had been sold or donated. The walls were bare except for the faint outlines where family photos had hung for decades. With each item I packed, the house echoed louder. I moved through the rooms with care, pausing briefly in the bedroom I'd shared with Owen, the place where we had ended our days side by side for so many years. By mid-afternoon, the movers had finished loading the last box into the van. Iris pulled up just as I was locking the front door. She hugged me gently and didn't ask if I was sure. I appreciated that. We drove together, the van ahead of us, through roads I'd known all my life, heading toward a part of the city I'd only visited as a guest. Brooklyn Heights was already alive when we arrived. People strolled through the greenways, others sat in cafe patios with open books or strollers beside them. My new apartment was just as I remembered it, bright, neat, and ready. The boxes were placed just where I'd labeled them, and Iris helped me unpack the essentials while Brad and Faye stopped by with groceries and dinner. The first few days passed in a quiet rhythm. I arranged the kitchen shelves, hung the curtains I'd brought from the old house, and placed Owen's picture on the dresser near the window. The morning light fell just right across his smile. Faye came by after school most afternoons, sitting cross-legged on the floor as we sorted silverware or tested out board games at the dining table. She talked about her teachers and classmates, her voice filling the new space with the kind of comfort only a child can bring. The complex itself felt like a small town tucked inside the city. I joined a yoga class for seniors twice a week and started attending a book group that met Thursday evenings in the community lounge. The conversations were easy, the faces friendly. There was something simple and satisfying about walking into a room and being greeted by name. I met Eleanor during my second week. She lived 2 doors down and had been a literature teacher for over 30 years. We crossed paths near the mailbox and ended up walking together to the cafe downstairs. We started sharing morning coffee every Friday. She'd bring the crossword, and I'd bring the biscotti. Our conversations meandered from poetry to recipes to the quirks of aging. One morning she said, "At our age, starting over is not about running from something. It's about giving yourself permission to live again." A few weeks after the move, while I was organizing some paperwork in the living room, my phone rang. It was Lionel. I hadn't heard from him since the day he and Veronica had pushed the power of attorney across my kitchen table. His name on the screen gave me pause, but I answered. "Mom," he said too quickly. "I've got great news." His voice was upbeat, almost smug. "I sold the beach house and the car. Got a good deal on both. We're wrapping up everything this week." I sat down slowly, phone pressed to my ear. "Lionel," I said, "what do you mean you sold them?" "The house and the car," he repeated as if I hadn't heard. "I told you I'd take care of it. No need to stress over the logistics. I had Mr. Burton draw up everything, and we finalized with the buyers." I waited a beat before answering. "Lionel, I sold the beach house and the car over 2 months ago. Legally. Through Hugo Prescott." There was silence on the other end, thick and uneasy. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "What are you talking about? I used the proceeds to buy my apartment here in Brooklyn Heights. Hugo handled everything. The beach house, the car. All of it's done." Another pause. Then came a clipped, panicked tone. "That's not possible. I already accepted payment. He stopped short. "You didn't even tell me." "No, I said I didn't. Because I didn't need to." His voice cracked. "You don't understand. I already spent part of the money. The buyers expect the property." "What am I supposed to give them now?" I kept my voice steady. "That's something you'll have to sort out. You sold something that didn't belong to you." "I need to come over," he said. "We need to talk in person. I'll be there in an hour." He hung up before I could reply. I sat still for a moment, staring at the blank screen, then stood and moved to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water, then called Iris. I told her what happened, and she offered to come over immediately. I thanked her, but told her not to. I need to handle this one on my own. Exactly an hour later, the doorbell rang. Lionel stood there looking less polished than usual. Veronica was with him, her arms crossed tight against her chest. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside. They looked around the apartment as they entered at the open windows, the clean lines, the photos on the shelves. "You really went through with it," Lionel said. "You sold everything and moved." "Yes," I answered, "and I'm happy here." We sat at the small dining table. He started explaining how he'd used Mr. Burton to draft the documents, how he'd presented the property to buyers, how everything had moved so fast. "I assumed you hadn't done anything yet," he said. "You said you'd think about it." "I did," I replied. "And then I acted." Veronica leaned in. "Do you have any idea what kind of legal mess this puts us in?" Lionel accepted money. "There's paperwork. There's a timeline. You'll have to return the money," I said, "or explain the situation honestly." "We can't," Lionel said. "I already used part of it for the deposit on the new condo, and we booked the cruise for our anniversary." I didn't respond right away. I just looked at them, both of them. Veronica's expression was tight. Lionel's was slipping from frustration to something closer to fear. He ran his hands through his hair and stood up. "You could help us fix this," he said. "Just a loan to get us back on track. I'll pay it back. We just need a little help right now." I stood too. "Lionel, I can't do that." "Why not?" he asked, voice rising. "You helped Iris. You paid off part of their mortgage." "I did," I said, "because she's never tried to take from me. She asked nothing. She offered support, not control." He looked away. Veronica stood. "We should go," she said. Her voice was low, her eyes sharp. "This conversation isn't going anywhere." They left without another word. I closed the door gently and stood there, the quiet settling back into the room. Outside, the light had started to fade. Inside, everything still felt in place. I walked to the terrace and stepped out, letting the air steady me. The sky was soft and gray above the trees, and down below I could hear someone laughing faintly on the path near the fountain. The morning after Lionel and Veronica left, I woke to a clear sky and the hum of traffic far below. I poured a cup of coffee and took it out onto the terrace. The air was cooler than usual, a little wind off the park, but it felt good. Inside the apartment still held the quiet from the night before. No clutter, no tension, just space. I stood there a long while before I picked up the phone and called Iris. She answered on the first ring. "Everything okay?" she asked. I told her Lionel had come by, that he knew everything, now the sales, the apartment, the move. She asked if she should come over. I said no, not yet. "We got through it," I told her. "I just needed to let someone know." That day passed slowly. I did a load of laundry, walked down to the mailboxes and back, put together a donation box with a few extra dishes I realized I didn't need. Around sunset, I made tea and sat near the window. The phone rang again, Lionel's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The next day he called again. Then, the day after. I finally answered the third time. "Mom," he said, his voice tired. "I need to talk to you, please." We agreed to meet at the lobby cafe in my building. When I arrived, he was already sitting near the window stirring a cup of black coffee. He looked different, drawn shoulders lower than usual. He stood when he saw me and motioned to the seat across from him. "I'm in trouble," he said. "I don't know how else to put it." He explained that the buyers had demanded their money back. There were lawyers involved now, and Mr. Burton had stopped returning his calls. He said Veronica had left filed for divorce after calling him reckless and dishonest. He was living in a short-term rental and had taken out a high-interest loan to repay part of the fraud. "I thought I had time to figure it out," he said. "I didn't expect you to act so quickly. I was planning everything. I thought I had control." He looked down at his hands. "But it got away from me." I listened without interrupting. The cafe was quiet, just a few other residents having tea or reading. When he finally looked up, he said, "I know you still have some money left. From the sales. I need a loan to fix this. I'll pay you back. With interest. Please." I took a breath before answering. "Lionel, I said I can't do that." He blinked. "You helped Iris. You paid off part of their mortgage. Why not me? Because she didn't ask for control. She didn't try to take what wasn't hers. She didn't forge papers or sell property behind my back. I didn't forge, he started, but stopped. His shoulders slumped. I just thought I was doing the right thing, trying to keep things in the family." "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about how you see me. How you decided I couldn't be trusted to live my life." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "You're my mother. I was trying to protect you." "No," I said gently. "You were trying to manage me." He sat back, staring past me toward the front desk. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly. I stood up, placed my napkin on the table. "I hope you figure it out," I said. "And when you do, we can talk again. But not until then." He didn't follow me when I walked away. I rode the elevator up to the 9th floor and stepped into the quiet warmth of my home. Faye was coming over that evening to bake cookies. Iris had promised to bring her by after work. I set out the mixing bowls and the sugar canister, then pulled out the recipe card from the drawer. Owen had written it out years ago, his handwriting careful and neat. I propped it against the wall and got the butter from the fridge. That night, while Faye sprinkled cinnamon sugar over the dough, I told Iris about the conversation. She didn't say much at first, just nodded, helping Faye clean flour off her dress. "You did the right thing," she said softly once Faye ran off to the living room. "It wasn't an easy thing, but it was the right thing." Brad joined us later, setting a bottle of wine and 3 glasses on the counter. "We all need a toast," he said, "to clean starts." Iris poured for everyone, and we clinked glasses in the soft kitchen light. It was quiet, easy. No tension, no careful words, just warmth. We sat for a while after that, listening to the muffled sounds of city life beyond the windows. Before they left, Brad paused near the door. "There's something I wanted to tell you," he said. "Back when Iris and I first saw this apartment, we weren't sure you'd be able to swing it financially. So I asked a friend in the sales office to hold it for a bit. We had talked about helping you buy it if you needed help." I looked at him, then at Iris. She smiled, reaching for my hand. "We didn't want to pressure you," she said. "We just wanted you close." I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. We hugged goodnight, and I stood at the door for a moment after they left, watching their silhouettes disappear into the hallway. When I turned back toward the apartment, everything felt just right. The pictures on the walls, the scent of cookies in the air, the low hum of the city through the glass. I turned off the kitchen lights, poured myself a cup of tea, and settled into the chair by the window. 2 weeks passed without a word from Lionel. I kept myself busy with simple routines, morning walks, arranging flowers from the Saturday market, folding laundry, while the news hummed in the background. There was a rhythm to the quiet now, and for the first time in years, that quiet didn't feel empty. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old letters, I found one of Owen's from his first deployment. The paper had yellowed at the edges, his handwriting slanted and neat. I sat there on the rug and read it twice. His words were calm, steady, telling me about the view from the base, the coffee being too strong, the way he missed the smell of my cinnamon rolls. He'd ended with, "Don't worry, Ellie. You raised strong kids. I'll be back before the leaves change." I folded the letter back carefully, tucked it into its envelope, and slid it into the desk drawer. That same evening, Iris called. "There's something I think you should see," she said. "Brad's been following some things online." Iris and Brad came over after dinner. Brad handed me his tablet already pulled up to a post on a community forum. At the top was a long message from someone calling themselves Concerned Buyer. It described how they had been misled into purchasing a property listed by Lionel in my name. They'd since learned I hadn't authorized the sale. The post asked if anyone else had similar experiences. There were replies. 3 others, all using aliases, claimed they'd also purchased or placed deposits on properties that were later pulled without explanation. Brad swiped to another thread. A photo had been attached, one of my old houses, the one Lionel had tried to sell out from under me. The caption read, "Is this house even on the market legally?" I looked up at him. "How did you find this? I get alerts on real estate fraud," he said. "Comes with the territory." Iris reached for my hand. "Mom, this could get messy, but you're not alone in this." We sat in silence for a moment. Then I asked Brad if he could reach out to the poster. He nodded. "Already messaged them. They're scared. They just want answers." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the other names, the other buyers. If what Lionel had done to me, he'd done to strangers, it wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was something else. Bigger. The next morning, I called Louise Prescott. She was a real estate attorney Owen and I had known years ago. We hadn't spoken since his funeral, but when I explained what had happened, she agreed to meet me for lunch. We met at a little restaurant near the courthouse. Louise had silver hair now, but the same calm eyes. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out, the forged contracts, the pressure to sell the unauthorized listings. When I finished, she asked only one question. "Do you have proof?" I handed her a folder. Inside were photocopies of Lionel's listings, bank statements from the quick sales, and screenshots Brad had collected. She flipped through the pages slowly. "This is enough to make noise," she said. "Not just in civil court, Eleanor. There's a criminal angle here." I nodded. "I don't want to hurt him, but I want this to stop." Louise folded her hands. "You're not the one hurting him. He did that himself." She agreed to contact the buyers directly and begin building a case. "Let me handle the legal side," she said, "but there's something else I'd recommend, if you're willing." She suggested I issue a public letter, something calm, factual, but clear. It would go in the local real estate newsletter, just a few paragraphs explaining my side of the story, setting the record straight. No accusations, just truth. I wrote the letter that evening. I kept it simple. I said that I was the legal owner of all the properties in question, and that any sale not accompanied by my signature was unauthorized. I offered my contact information for any concerned parties. Then I ended it with, "I am not seeking sympathy, only clarity and peace." Louise had it published the next day. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 emails and 2 phone calls. Some were polite, some were panicked. One woman broke down crying on the phone, saying her family had moved across the country believing they'd bought a forever home only to be told it wasn't legally theirs. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I didn't know until it was too late." She thanked me for being honest. Iris came over again that Friday. She brought Faye, who ran straight to my couch and curled up with a blanket. Iris and I stood in the kitchen watching the skyline fade into dusk. "I think this is only going to grow," Iris said. "Are you ready for that?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "For the first time, I think I really am." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "I almost forgot," she said, smiling. "Faye made this at school. She wanted you to have it." Inside that was a homemade pin, a little house with a heart in the middle drawn in red marker, laminated with tape. "It's your new place," Iris said. "She says it means you're safe now." I held the pin in my hand, traced the crooked roof with my thumb. Then I pinned it to the inside of my sweater, just over my heart. That Monday morning, Louise called just after 8. Her voice was even, but I could tell something had shifted. "It's time," she said. "The County Fraud Division has reviewed the evidence. They're moving forward." I stood at the kitchen window, one hand on my coffee mug, watching a crow land on the railing. "What happens now?" "They'll contact Lionel formally," she said. "He'll be asked to appear for questioning. It's not a public trial yet, but if he doesn't cooperate, it will be." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just kept looking at the crow. It tilted its head, then flew off. Louise continued, "You did the right thing, Eleanor, and I'll be with you every step of the way." By noon, word had already begun to circulate. Iris texted me first. "Is it true? Did they really open a case?" I answered yes and nothing else. Around 3:08 p.m., my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. It was Lionel. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. "You didn't have to go this far, Mom." I didn't respond right away. "I would have figured something out," he said. "You didn't have to ruin everything." I took a slow breath. "You sold homes that didn't belong to you. You forged my signature. You lied to strangers, Lionel, and you lied to me." He was quiet on the other end. "Then I just wanted to fix things. The loans. The market collapsed. I thought I could recover. You thought I'd roll over like I always did?" "No," he snapped. "I thought maybe for once you'd be proud of me." That hit something I hadn't expected. I closed my eyes and let the silence stretch. "Lionel," I said finally, "I always wanted to be proud of you. But you made choices I can't protect anymore. Not from the truth, and not from the law." He hung up without another word. That evening, Brad stopped by to drop off a copy of a buyer's affidavit. "There'll probably be more," he said. "A few of the families are lawyering up too." We sat out back while the sun dipped behind the trees. He didn't ask how I was feeling, and I was grateful for that. We just watched the sky shift. A week later, the official notice came. Lionel had been issued a cease and desist for all property dealings tied to my name. He was also under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, document falsification, and misrepresentation of assets. If charges stuck, he could face serious time. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't anything sweet about it, just a kind of quiet finality. 2 days later, Lionel showed up at my front door. He looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw unshaven. I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch. "Are you happy now?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I'm relieved." He nodded slowly. "They froze my accounts. I had to move back into a rental in Norcross." "Everything's gone, Mom. Everything." "You still have a daughter," I said quietly, "and a niece who used to adore you." He rubbed his eyes. "I messed up." "Yes," I said. "You did." He looked around the porch like he wanted to stall. "So that's it. You're just done with me." "I'm not done with you," I said. But I'm done cleaning up after you. You need to take responsibility. His jaw tensed. He nodded again, this time slower. Then he turned and walked down the steps without another word. That weekend, Iris came over with a bag of groceries. "Faye made cookies," she said. "She wants to know if you'll taste test." We sat in the kitchen while she unpacked. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the room. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Seeing him?" I thought about it. "He's still my son," I said, "but I don't know if I'll ever trust him again." She nodded. "You don't have to." Later that night, I stood in the doorway of the extra room. The desk lamp was on. Owen's letter was still there, tucked beneath the glass. I stared at the words he'd written decades ago. "You raised strong kids." I whispered out loud. "One of them still is." Then I turned off the light and walked down the hall, the soft scent of cinnamon still hanging in the air. The seasons shifted gently in Brooklyn Heights, and with every morning light streaming across my little kitchen table, I felt more at home in this new chapter of my life. The sharp ache that once filled my chest whenever I thought of Lionel slowly softened into something I could carry. We spoke less often, just enough to remind each other that love could survive disappointment even if trust took longer to mend. Iris and Brad became the steady heart of my days, and Faye's laughter in my living room was like a song I never tired of hearing. With Louise's help, the buyers of my former homes were made whole, and the cloud that hung over the old addresses finally lifted. I began volunteering at the library, helping children find their first stories, and in those quiet afternoons, I felt a small but steady hope grow. Iris visited often sometimes with cookies, sometimes just to sit with me as the city lights came on outside the window. We would talk about everything and nothing. Her garden project's Faye's latest school story, the small joys that had become the backbone of my days. One Saturday evening, Lionel sent a text. It was simple. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well." I replied just as simply, and let it be. That was enough for now. The rest I knew would come in its own time, if at all. Looking back, I realized that the hardest part was not the loss of houses or the upheaval of old routines, but learning to say yes to the life waiting on the other side of heartbreak. I learned that dignity is not something anyone can take from you, not even family, if you remember your own worth. Justice, I found, is often quiet, arriving in the form of boundaries set and choices reclaimed. Some days, I still catch myself glancing at the old photograph of Owen on my dresser, wondering if I'd made the right choices. Then I see Iris smile, or Faye bring me a homemade card, or Brad stop by just to check on the plants, and I know I have. As I sit here tonight, lights twinkling across the park, I am grateful for every difficult lesson, every friend who stood by me, and every moment of peace I've earned. I hope that if you're listening, you remember that it's never too late to claim your own story, to stand up gently but firmly for what you deserve. If you've faced a crossroads or learned to set boundaries with those you love, I hope you'll share your story or just know you're not alone. Thank you for being with me through this journey.